Imagine walking into a chamber untouched for millennia. Dust hangs in the air like whispers from the past. A golden mask stares back at you, serene, beautiful, and utterly tragic. You approach, flashlight trembling, drawn toward the fragile linen wrapping the body of a boy who once ruled the most powerful empire on Earth. But this isn't a tale of glory. His spine twisted, his foot mangled, his body broken long before death claimed him. And the truth dawns slowly, painfully. This was not fate. This was engineered suffering. His parents were siblings, his grandparents were siblings, his entire bloodline, poisoned by generations of incest, bred not for love, but for power. Imagine being worshipped as a god, yet living in a body that failed you every day. That's not mythology. That's history. Before we continue, tell me where in the world you're watching from. Leave a comment below. It always amazes me that people from every corner of the globe can gather to uncover ancient stories together. If you enjoy this kind of history brought to life, don't forget to like and subscribe. We're just getting started. Ancient Egypt, the land of pyramids, gods, and legendary dynasties. But beneath the grandeur of golden tombs and towering statues, a hidden tragedy unfolded. For 3,000 years, Egypt's pharaohs believed their blood was divine, too pure to be mixed with commoners. To preserve their sacred lineage, they turned to each other, brothers marrying sisters, cousins uniting across generations. What began as religious devotion spiraled into a genetic catastrophe. This wasn't an isolated anomaly. It was a calculated, systematic collapse hidden behind temple walls and royal propaganda. Court physicians recorded mysterious ailments. Children died young. Deformities multiplied. But no one dared challenge the myth of divine purity. Behind Egypt's shimmering glory, a biological time bomb was quietly ticking. This is the story of how the most powerful rulers in human history became victims of their own divine illusion. The story begins with Akhenaten, born in 1353 BCE, a pharaoh whose very body bore the scars of his dynasty's obsession. His skull elongated like a stretched melon, his hips wide and chest feminized, Akhenaten walked through gilded halls with a gait that betrayed pain and imbalance. Artists dared for the first time to depict a pharaoh, not in perfect form, but with unsettling realism, bulging bellies, alien proportions, haunting symmetry. These weren't abstract aesthetics. They were genetic records carved in stone. Born from a long line of sibling unions, Akhenaten was both king and cautionary tale. His deformities were cloaked in divine justification. Priests called him blessed. His family called him chosen. But the truth was written in every awkward movement, every whispered conversation behind palace doors. He married Nefertiti, possibly a cousin or sister, and fathered daughters who bore his same twisted features. Sons, if any, died too young to be recorded. The pharaoh's most radical decision, to abandon Egypt's many gods for a singular deity, Aten, may have been born from desperation. If the old gods had cursed his blood, perhaps a new one would offer mercy. His son, Tutankhamun, inherited more than the throne. He inherited a body so damaged by incest that survival itself became heroic. Born in 1341 BCE, Tutankhamun's left foot was turned inward, his spine curved painfully, and he suffered from multiple genetic disorders, including a compromised immune system. At just 9 years old, he was crowned king, but every step he took required a cane. Over 130 walking sticks were found in his tomb, not symbols of power, but evidence of constant struggle. His wife, Akhenaten, was also his half-sister. Their attempts at continuing the bloodline ended in stillbirths, tiny mummified remains buried with them, silent echoes of a failing dynasty. Tutankhamun died at 19, likely from a combination of malaria and bone disease. But the true cause lay deeper, in his DNA, corrupted by centuries of decisions made in the name of purity. His tomb, discovered untouched in 1922, became a symbol of Egypt's grandeur. But inside, science uncovered a story of suffering, of a boy god broken by a system that revered bloodline over health. These stories, of Akhenaten and his doomed son, show us not the might of Egypt, but the cost of its most sacred belief. They were born to rule, yet sentenced to suffer by a legacy they did not choose. But these were just 2 lives. The real question is, how far did this tragedy reach? Centuries after Tutankhamun, Egypt fell not to war, but to inheritance. In 305 BCE, after Alexander the Great's death, one of his generals, Ptolemy I, seized Egypt and founded a new dynasty. Though Macedonian by blood, he knew that to rule Egyptians, he must become Egyptian. And so he embraced the customs of the Pharaohs, starting with their most dangerous tradition: sibling marriage. For the next 300 years, the Ptolemies perfected royal inbreeding. They married brother to sister, generation after generation, until the family tree resembled a twisted circle. The same names, Ptolemy, Cleopatra, appeared again and again, looping through the generations like a genetic chant. These weren't ceremonial unions. These were active reproductive partnerships, encouraged and enforced to maintain purity of rule. The result? A dynasty where many members were simultaneously siblings, cousins, parents, and children to each other. By the time Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh, was born in 69 BCE, the damage was done. Though ancient art depicts her as stunning, modern historians suggest otherwise. After 2.5 centuries of inbreeding, Cleopatra likely bore the same physical consequences seen in her predecessors: jaw abnormalities, skull elongation, and potential reproductive issues. What set her apart wasn't her looks, it was her intellect. She spoke 9 languages, studied philosophy, and ruled in a world of men. Her brilliance was her last weapon against genetic ruin. Cleopatra's desperate attempts to save her bloodline by having children with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony were not just political maneuvers, they were genetic salvation efforts. But Rome had no interest in preserving a dying dynasty. Her children were either killed or vanished from the historical record. When Cleopatra took her life in 30 BCE, she ended not just a reign, but the most intensive experiment in human inbreeding ever conducted. From the tomb of Tutankhamun to the palace of Cleopatra, the pattern is painfully clear. These were not isolated cases, but part of a repeating cycle, where power bred arrogance, and arrogance bred genetic ruin. The question we must now ask is not what happened, but why. Why did generation after generation embrace a tradition so clearly destructive? At the core of Egypt's royal tragedy lies a biological truth ignored for millennia. Incest breeds genetic catastrophe. The pharaohs believed they were gods, and in that belief they engineered their own downfall, one marriage at a time. In biological terms, incest increases the probability that offspring will inherit identical copies of harmful recessive genes. Normally, these genes remain harmless, masked by a healthy version from the other parent. But when parents are closely related, the odds of both carrying the same genetic flaws skyrocket. The result? Children born with deformities, weakened immune systems, hormonal imbalances, and neurological problems. Ancient Egyptians didn't know this. They had no concept of DNA, alleles, or autosomal recessive inheritance, but they had eyes. They saw club feet, cleft palates, elongated skulls, and stillborn infants. Physicians meticulously documented these anomalies, yet failed to connect them to the root cause, genetic isolation. Their religious framework rendered them blind. To question the divine bloodline was to question the gods themselves, a sacrilege punishable by death or exile. Instead, they reframed biological warning signs as spiritual symbols. A prince with an unusual jaw wasn't suffering from a genetic defect, he bore a mark of divine favor. A stillbirth wasn't a tragic failure, it was the gods calling a child home. Every deformity became prophecy, every death, destiny. The culture was so steeped in divine ideology that science had no place. Observation was twisted into affirmation. Confirmation bias turned tragedy into ritual. In this way, Egypt became the world's first unintentional genetics lab. Over 3,000 years, multiple dynasties repeated the same experiment: isolate the gene pool and measure the effects. The result was catastrophic. But what's most terrifying is not that it happened, it's that no one stopped it. The warning signs were clear. painted on temple walls and buried in royal tombs. But belief triumphed over biology, ideology over evidence, tradition over truth. The scientific truth was available, in plain sight, encoded in the bodies of dying kings and deformed children. But it was ignored, dismissed, and reinterpreted. Which begs the next question: who allowed this to continue? Who had the power to intervene, and chose not to? The tragedy of Egypt's royal bloodline wasn't caused by ignorance alone. It was sustained by institutions that prioritized tradition, power, and control over truth. Temples, palaces, and courts became echo chambers of affirmation, where priests, physicians, and advisors all played their parts in upholding a fatal illusion. The priesthood, guardians of divine doctrine, were among the most powerful forces in ancient Egypt. They preached that the pharaoh's blood carried the essence of Ra, Horus, and Osiris, a holy inheritance not to be diluted. For these religious elites, sibling marriage wasn't just accepted, it was sacred law. To challenge it would be to challenge the gods, and thus, the very legitimacy of the state. So when deformities appeared, they created theological explanations, signs of spiritual favor, divine uniqueness, even mystical protection. Royal physicians, many of whom were exceptionally observant, documented strange diseases, fragile limbs, and high infant mortality. But their diagnoses stopped short of the obvious. Whether from fear, indoctrination, or professional pressure, they never challenged the system. Their silence was complicity. They recorded symptoms, not causes. They treated broken bodies, but ignored the broken logic behind them. Advisors and courtiers whose careers depended on royal favor reinforced the myth. A prince unable to walk unaided was proclaimed spiritually enlightened. A queen who lost multiple children was said to be communing with the afterlife. These lies weren't just convenient. They were necessary to keep the machinery of divine rule intact. In a world where truth could mean death, complicity became survival. Even the people, steeped in reverence for their rulers, played a role. They accepted the myth of god-kings without question, bowing before boys who struggled to breathe. The illusion was so powerful, so deeply embedded, that no one dared to peel it back. Egypt's institutions didn't just fail to prevent this tragedy, they actively enabled it. They transformed suffering into sanctity and disease into destiny. In doing so, they sealed the fate of every future pharaoh born into a body already broken by belief. For centuries, silence reigned. Pain was sanctified. Deformity was deified. But eventually, the illusion cracked. Voices of dissent began to emerge, courageous individuals who dared to speak truth to power, and from that truth, a fight for justice was born. The illusion of divine perfection could not survive forever. In time, whispers grew into voices, and voices into defiance. The first cracks appeared not through revolt or rebellion, but through realism, on temple walls and palace sculptures. Akhenaten's artistic revolution, once viewed as religious heresy, was also a quiet act of rebellion against genetic denial. He ordered artists to depict the royal family as they truly were: elongated heads, sunken chests, bowed limbs. It was a visual scream for truth hidden behind chisel and paint. Centuries later, the silence would break more definitively, not from within Egypt, but from the modern world. In 1922, Howard Carter unearthed the tomb of Tutankhamun. It was the most complete pharaonic burial ever found. But buried with the gold and splendor was a darker story. Over 130 walking sticks, tiny coffins of stillborn children, skeletal remains showing deformities that could no longer be disguised as divine traits. For the first time, science could speak where history had lied. In 2010, DNA analysis confirmed what had long been suspected. Tutankhamun was the product of incest. His parents were full siblings. His immune system was compromised. His deformities were not metaphysical, but medical. Egypt's sacred bloodline had become a case study in genetic failure. These revelations didn't bring revenge or prosecution. Those responsible were long dead. But they brought vindication. The pharaoh's pain, once dismissed or sanctified, was finally acknowledged. Museums revised their narratives. History books added chapters on genetic consequences. And for the first time, these royal children, once symbols of power, were seen for what they truly were: victims. Justice in this case was not punishment. It was understanding. Truth became the balm that history had denied them. And through that truth, the world learned a vital lesson. No tradition, no power, no ideology is worth the suffering of generations. The golden illusion was shattered, the silence broken. But even as the last pharaohs faded into history, their legacy endured. And so we ask, what did it all mean? What lessons remain, buried with their bones and echoed in their blood? The story of Egypt's royal bloodlines is not merely a cautionary tale, it is a mirror. It reflects what happens when ideology overrides reality, when the pursuit of purity replaces compassion, and when tradition blinds even the most advanced civilizations to their own destruction. The pharaohs sought to preserve divinity but engineered decay. Their greatest failure wasn't just genetic, it was moral. They chose image over integrity, doctrine over humanity. And yet, from their collapse, we inherit clarity. Today we know that strength lies in diversity, that health thrives on variation. The pharaoh's downfall has become our understanding, their suffering, our inherited wisdom. Imagine once more the boy in the golden mask, not as a god but as a child who limped through palace halls under the weight of centuries, a child who believed he was divine, yet lived a life of pain and confusion. The mask gleams still, but now we see through it. Beneath the gold is not mystery, but message. He is no longer a symbol of ancient power. He is a voice from the past, whispering a truth we must never forget. To honor the pharaohs is not to worship them. It is to recognize their humanity. Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, Cleopatra. They were not gods, but people born into systems they did not choose. Their lives were shaped by forces they could not control, but their stories, preserved in bone, blood, and tomb, can guide us. Let them not be remembered only for their crowns and conquests, but for the lesson they left behind: that no ideology, no power, no lineage is worth the suffering of children. From their golden tombs they whisper a final plea: learn from us. Protect the future. Choose compassion over pride. Choose humanity